Have you ever felt like someone was pulling the strings of your life, quietly twisting truth, sowing doubt, and making you question what you know in your core? There are those who don't fight with fists, but with confusion. They prey not on weakness, but on goodness, using your patience, your empathy, your silence against you. But you were not made to be a pawn in their game. You were meant to stand firm, rooted in clarity and guided by reason. In this video, we'll explore powerful Stoic strategies to reclaim your ground. Stay with me, this might change how you see everything. 1. Silence is the weapon of the wise. Silence is not submission, nor is it a sign of weakness. It is composure forged by discipline, a blade honed not for noise, but for precision. In a world filled with manipulation and distortion, the natural impulse is to speak, to defend, to justify, to resist with noise. But that is precisely what the manipulator seeks: to entangle you in their chaos, to drag you into endless debate, to draw from you the very energy that sustains their control. They do not argue to find clarity, they argue to conquer your focus. Yet, when you meet their provocation with stillness, when you respond not with words, but with presence, you break the rhythm of their design. Your silence becomes a wall they cannot climb, a mirror they cannot distort. They panic, not because you attacked, but because you refuse to engage. Silence unsettles the deceiver because it exposes their theater for what it is: hollow, performative, built on the assumption that you will react. Words can carry power, but so can their absence. Stoic silence is not a void, it is a declaration of sovereignty. It signals that you will not be pulled into games beneath you, that your clarity, your self-command, cannot be disrupted by provocation. In silence, you reclaim the high ground. You strip away their ability to twist your responses, to bait you into positions of weakness. The manipulator thrives on your emotional investment, but once you remove it, once you stop offering yourself up to be provoked, their influence dissolves. You rob them of momentum. You stop the story they are trying to write with your reactions, and that is the beginning of mastery. Because true power is not always heard. Sometimes, it is simply the refusal to respond. Sometimes, it is silence that speaks loudest of all. 2. Manipulators thrive on your reactions. The manipulator's strength does not lie in truth, but in your reaction to their provocation. The moment you argue, explain, or try to prove your virtue, you hand them exactly what they seek: your energy, your attention, and most dangerously, control over the terms of the encounter. But when you remain silent, truly silent, with composure and clarity, they are left disarmed. They find nothing to twist, no emotion to weaponize, no foothold to regain the upper hand. It is in that stillness that their performance begins to unravel. A deceiver cannot survive without someone to deceive. They require engagement to sustain the illusion. But when you withdraw not in fear, but in discipline, they are forced to confront their own words, their own emptiness, and often, that is when their mask begins to crack. This is not passivity, it is power. As the book of Proverbs says, even a fool is thought wise if he keeps silent. Why? Because silence exposes the difference between noise and meaning. It commands presence without explanation. Christ himself, when brought before those who twisted his words and intentions, did not plead. He did not argue with those already bent on misunderstanding. He stood firm, letting the silence carry more weight than 1,000 defenses. This is not avoidance, it is discernment. The Stoic knows when to speak and when to withhold, when to act and when to endure. True strength lies not in how loudly we respond, but in how firmly we remain unmoved. But silence is only powerful when it is rooted in virtue. If your restraint comes from fear or resentment, it is merely repression waiting to burst. The Stoic practices silence not to escape, but to master himself. to remain still, outwardly and inwardly. Because when you no longer fear the discomfort of not reacting, when you can sit calmly in the storm without offering your energy to it, then the game changes. You are no longer a participant, you become the immovable center. This is the shift. When you stop defending yourself to those who seek no truth, when your worth is no longer up for debate, you become unshakable. And that, more than any counterattack, is what breaks the manipulator's power. Not fury, not arguments, but silence, calm, confident, sovereign silence. 3. Truth disrupts their control. Truth is not an abstract idea to be debated or manipulated. It is a living force, sharp, unwavering, and luminous. It slices through confusion the way light dissolves darkness. To those who seek control through deception, truth is not just inconvenient, it is terrifying. It cannot be shaped, it cannot be bought, and it cannot be silenced. This is what makes it your most formidable weapon when facing manipulators. Not because it makes you louder, but because it makes you immovable. Those who operate through deceit cannot build on what is solid. They craft their power from illusions, carefully spun half-truths, and emotional fog. They rely on your uncertainty, your hesitation, your silence in moments that demand clarity. If they can make you question what your eyes see and your conscience affirms, they win. If they can make you feel unsure about what is obvious, they can mold your entire world around their design. That is the battleground, not in shouting, not in proving, but in perception. But once you stand firmly on truth, once you decide that you will not yield to the stories they script, you strip away their greatest advantage. You remove the stage they perform on. You no longer play the part they assigned you in their theater of control. You don't need to shout it. You don't need to make speeches. You simply need to see clearly and act accordingly, because clarity alone unravels their spell. When you call a thing by its true name, it loses its power to disguise itself. This is why truth is feared by the manipulative. It cannot be reshaped to fit their needs. It exposes, it disrupts, it divides reality from illusion. And yes, truth can be costly. It may demand your comfort, your social approval, even certain relationships. But the Stoics remind us what is virtue worth. If it must be bought with compromise, the price of clarity is steep, but the reward is peace, dignity, and the kind of inner strength that cannot be shaken by falsehood. Christ himself declared, "You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." This was not spiritual poetry, it was Stoic precision. Freedom does not come from avoiding conflict. It comes from seeing clearly and refusing to be bent by distortion. It means standing in solitude when necessary. It means being misunderstood, mischaracterized, even rejected, but never leaving your post, because the manipulator does not argue in good faith. They don't seek understanding, they seek your exhaustion. They twist reason not to illuminate, but to entangle. They disguise confusion as nuance, and if you engage them on their terms, you drown. That's why the wise don't strive to win arguments. They strive to remain anchored. The truth does not beg to be believed. It simply endures. So how do you stand on truth when everything around you is shifting first? You must be relentless in pursuing what is real. Ask the questions others are too afraid to ask. Reject the comforting lie in favor of the difficult truth. Second, do not engage in arguments designed only to confuse. If someone is committed to distortion, silence is your strength. And finally, accept that truth will cost you. But whatever it demands, it repays in freedom when your footing is firm, when you are no longer seduced by performance or distracted by distortion. The manipulator begins to falter. Their tactics lose precision. Their words lose sting. Their control collapses. Because their power was never real. It only worked on those who could not yet see clearly. Once you see, you cannot unsee. And once you stand in truth, you become someone they cannot move. That is where their game ends, and your freedom begins. 4. Refusing to play the game. One of the most liberating truths you'll ever realize is this: manipulative people do not draw their power from brilliance, strength, or insight. They draw it from your reaction. Their influence over you is not a result of their dominance, but of your willingness to engage on their terms, to justify yourself, to argue, to explain, to try to win fairness from those who never intended to be fair. Every time you yield ground in an effort to preserve peace or be understood, you hand over a piece of your freedom. But the moment you stop responding in the way they expect, the moment you step out of their emotional labyrinth, their hold on you begins to collapse. The Stoics understood this with clarity. External forces can provoke, but only we decide how we respond. Manipulators are not powerful because they are wise. They are powerful because they have learned to provoke the same patterns in others. They poke until you react. They prod until you explain. They accuse until you fall into their rhythm. And the tragedy is that most people mistake this manipulation for confusion. They think, maybe if I just explain better, if I'm more patient, if I try harder, they'll finally understand. But the manipulator does not seek understanding. They seek control. They care not for what is true, only for what works. You must break this pattern, and you do not break it by winning the argument. You break it by refusing to play. Consider Christ before Pilate, falsely accused, mocked, his words twisted. Yet he did not scramble to defend himself before those who had already made up their minds. He spoke plainly, sparingly, and with unwavering composure. He chose dignity over performance. This is Stoic strength in its purest form: presence without pleading, clarity without chaos. And this is where most people struggle. They think freedom is earned by proving the liar wrong, by exposing the deceiver in public, by dragging truth into the spotlight and forcing it to be acknowledged. But this belief is misguided. Manipulators do not operate in the light. They thrive in the fog, where doubt blurs reality and noise drowns reason. The more you engage them in their realm, the more disoriented you become. The wise path is not to outplay them, but to step off the board entirely. How? First, recognize the bait. They will use guilt, indignation, and provocation to pull you back into the arena. They will say things meant to shake your certainty, to rattle your center, to force you into a reactive state. But once you see the tactic, you are no longer under its spell. Second, master the art of silence. Not every accusation deserves an answer. Not every fire requires your breath. When you withhold reaction, you strip them of oxygen. You force them to confront the emptiness behind their theatrics. Third, cultivate unshakable self-respect. The Stoics taught us to know what is ours and what is not. Your worth, your clarity, your values, they are not dependent on another's recognition. When you stand anchored in your principles, no one can move you. You do not defeat manipulation by wrestling in its mud. You overcome it by rising above, by refusing to be pulled into the spiral of reaction and counter-reaction. And when you do, something remarkable happens. The manipulator, once confident and calculated, begins to lose grip. Without your compliance, their strategies fail. Without your energy, their game dissolves. What once felt like control is exposed as dependence. They depended on you playing along. So, withdraw. Not out of fear, but out of power. Refuse to participate. Refuse to respond. Let them unravel in the silence. And as they do, you will see the truth. Their power was never real. It existed only in your agreement to play by their rules. Withdraw that agreement, and you reclaim the one thing they cannot touch: your freedom. 5. Clarity as the antidote. There's a reason the manipulator works so hard to keep you distracted. They weave chaos like a spider spins its web, not with brute force, but with small, deliberate strands of confusion, petty arguments, false urgency, and endless demands for justification are their tools. Their goal is not truth, it is distraction. Because if you ever stepped back and truly saw the game, the whole structure would collapse under the weight of its own deceit. Manipulation cannot survive clarity. It thrives only in fog. And once you see clearly, once you stand in stillness and call things by their true names, you become unreachable. Many fall into the trap of overanalyzing, believing that if they just listen deeply enough, if they decode the words correctly, they will finally understand the manipulator's logic. But this is a fool's errand. The manipulator's words are not doors to understanding, they are traps. Carefully crafted half-truths, veiled insults, selective flattery, all designed to cloud your judgment and control your perception. They do not speak to reveal, they speak to entangle, and the more you chase clarity inside their maze, the more lost you become. The Stoics taught us to value what is rare and real. Christ himself warned against casting pearls before swine, not because truth is weak, but because it is sacred. It should never be trampled by those who cannot recognize its worth. Likewise, your energy, your presence, your discernment, these are not offerings to be wasted on the unworthy. There is a time for silence, a time to step away, a time to withhold yourself from those who twist reality not in ignorance, but in malice. That is what true clarity demands, not endless explanation, but the wisdom to know when a conversation is no longer a search for truth, but a performance meant to control. But clarity is not just about seeing the manipulator for who they are. It's also about seeing yourself without illusion. For manipulation only works where there is a wound to exploit. They do not overpower you. They press where you are already unsure, where guilt lingers, where fear whispers. They make you feel that you must prove your worth. Earn your place. Beg for their approval to be safe. But this is a lie dressed in familiarity. Until you call it what it is, it will rule you from within. So ask yourself, why do their words hold such weight? What fear makes you hesitate to walk away? What truth about yourself have you been unwilling to face? Because once you answer honestly, once you bring these shadows into the light, you remove their leverage. Their control was never about their power. It was about your unhealed places, and clarity begins when you confront those places without flinching. Make no mistake, freedom has a cost. When you stop playing along, manipulators don't retreat quietly. They escalate, they accuse, they play victim. They test the strength of your clarity with every tool they have. But this is your final trial. If your clarity is true, it will hold. You will not be drawn back in by pity or guilt or doubt. You will see them for what they are: desperate, not powerful. And when you refuse to move, when you stand where they cannot reach you, will witness their unraveling. Their control evaporates like mist in the morning sun, because it was never real. It was a phantom sustained by your participation. Withdraw that, and they are left with nothing, and that is when you are finally free. Not just from them, but from the part of you that once needed them. That is the gift of clarity. That is the antidote. 6. The difference between patience and passivity. There is a vital distinction between patience and passivity, one that the Stoic must learn if they are to walk in clarity. Patience is not weakness, it is not avoidance, it is the disciplined endurance of hardship, born from the understanding that time and adversity refine the soul. But passivity. Passivity is surrender dressed in silence. It is the slow erosion of self-respect, disguised as restraint. And nowhere is this confusion more dangerous than in the presence of the manipulative, those who exploit silence. Not out of misunderstanding, but because they sense an opening. To the manipulator, Your patience is not seen as virtue, it is seen as opportunity. Your silence, intended as peace, becomes permission. They do not respect your restraint, they feed on it. They press further, not because you are unclear, but because you haven't drawn the line. And so you must remember, righteousness is not timidity, and kindness is not the same as letting wrongdoing go unchecked. The Stoic knows there are moments to endure, but there are also moments to rise, to stand, and to declare, without anger but with conviction, no more. Even Christ, the embodiment of mercy, was not passive before corruption. He overturned the tables. He named hypocrisy. He did not meet deceit with cowardice, but with clarity. That is the example, and that is the path. Because if you do not learn the difference between patience and passivity, you will find yourself endlessly compromising with those who take without limit, who apologize without change, and who deceive without conscience. The manipulator's goal is not simply to mislead, but to exhaust. They want you questioning yourself, explaining endlessly, doubting your instincts, watering down your voice in the name of peace. But the moment you are explaining yourself to someone who is not listening, you are not in dialogue, you are in a trap. And resistance, even silent resistance, is what they fear most. They do not fear your kindness, they do not fear your understanding, they fear your clarity. They fear the moment you stop bending, the moment you stop dancing to the tune they set. That is when their power starts to fade. And so you must ask yourself, what have you tolerated in the name of harmony? What have you excused in the name of grace? How many times have you called cowardice patience, when in truth it was fear disguised as virtue? That silence you've kept it did not bring peace. It brought decay. It wore away at your sense of what is right. And now, it is time to reclaim it, not with rage, not with vengeance, but with the quiet courage to set boundaries that do not bend. To stop explaining to those committed to distortion, to stop hoping that appeasement will turn manipulation into understanding, because it will not. They will react, they always do, with blame, with guilt, with escalation. But let them. Do not waver. Their strength was never their own, it was built on your hesitation. Remove that, and they fall. This is the turning point, not a dramatic confrontation, but the steady refusal to continue the cycle. And in that silence, in that stillness, in that boundary that no longer moves, you will feel something ancient and powerful rise within you: freedom. The kind of freedom that is not given, but claimed. The kind that doesn't beg for understanding. The kind that simply stands and never looks back. 7. Enduring the storm. The moment you choose truth over submission, the moment you stop yielding to manipulation and step outside the web, the storm begins. Because those who rely on control do not surrender it willingly. They escalate, they provoke, they attempt to reclaim their grip through guilt, false remorse, accusation, and confusion. And this is the test, the one most people are not ready for. Breaking free is not just about recognizing the game. It's about standing tall when the game intensifies, when your silence disrupts their pattern. They don't retreat, they resist harder. At first, they are stunned. They are used to your compliance, your habit of smoothing things over, your willingness to carry the burden of peace alone. But when you draw the line, when you no longer bend, they accuse you of cruelty, of selfishness, of betrayal. And if that doesn't work, they become the victim. They remind you of their kindness, their sacrifices, their supposed love, all designed to pull you back under their spell. It has never been about fairness or truth. It has always been about control. And once you see this clearly, you must make your stand. The Stoic does not anchor their endurance in fleeting emotion, but in clarity of purpose. You must not expect the manipulator to change. They won't. Do not wait for them to admit fault. They won't. The question is not about their transformation, it is about your resolve. Will you stay the course when the storm howls? Will you hold the line when every voice tries to pull you back into the fog? This is why you must be rooted in something greater than sentiment. Your values, your principles, these are the firm ground beneath your feet. Remember Christ in the wilderness, offered power and comfort if only he would submit. He did not plead, he did not argue. He stood. That is the way of the Stoic, not reaction, but unwavering presence. Do not waste words on ears that will not hear. Do not defend yourself before those who distort every truth. Speak once if needed, then step away. And yes, it will hurt. You will doubt yourself. You will feel the ache of separation, the silence that follows courage. But that is where your strength is forged. Each moment you resist the pull. Each time you hold your ground, you reclaim what was lost. Your clarity sharpens. Your peace deepens. And slowly, the manipulator begins to see they no longer own space in your mind. Whether they change or not is not your burden. You were never tasked with saving them. You are tasked with preserving your own integrity. And if they refuse to face themselves, they will be broken by the very lies they built, because truth, like time, cannot be outrun, and the one who endures in truth, though bruised, though tested, emerges not just free, but unshakable. That is the storm's reward. That is the true victory. When someone refuses to grow, when they cling to control and hide behind illusion, they will eventually be undone not by force, but by the quiet weight of truth. So the real question isn't what they will do, it's what you will choose. Will you stand tall when the storm hits? Will you honor what you know is right? Even when it's uncomfortable, will you choose clarity? Even if it costs you the comfort of illusion, because if you do, if you refuse to be pulled back into games, if you hold your ground with quiet resolve, you won't just walk away. You'll rise, stronger, sharper, unshakable, and that is everything. This battle isn't just about seeing through manipulation, it's about returning to yourself, reclaiming your strength, your discernment, your peace. And yes, there will be resistance. But remember, truth does not tremble under pressure. It endures. So speak it, stand in it, and let it guide you through the chaos. If this message resonated with something deep inside you, don't just scroll on. Tap subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. We're only getting started. And in the comments, just write, "I choose truth." Not for attention, but as a quiet declaration to yourself and to the storm. Stay grounded, stay clear. You are not here to be controlled, you are here to become untouchable. The next step starts in the next video. I'll see you there.